Welcome to Stemco's TCV seal and bearing adjustment training. We're going to take you from inspection down to tear down to repair and all the way up to verifying end plate with a dial indicator. Visual inspection. What's visual inspection? It's the simplest inspection there is. All you're going to do is walk around that wheel end. If you see any oil or leakage on the outside of that hubcap or on the hub or the wheel, you have a problem. You need to fix the problem. A couple possibilities would be a leaky gasket on the hubcap. That's an easy fix. Another problem could be the hubcap itself. If you have a crack in that hubcap or a broken window, you need to replace the hubcap. Another problem that occurs is if you overfill that wheel end. If you overfill this wheel end with too much lubricant, it actually blows itself out through the center of this red plug. This little red plug right here has a hole dead center, all right? Everything, whether it's a steer, drive, or trailer, builds up pressure. So if you overfill that wheel end, what's going to happen? It's called misting. It actually blows the oil right through that hole. That oil gets where? On the hubcap, on the hub, and also the wheel. So don't overfill it. Now on the sight glass of these hubcaps right here, it does say add and full. How much do you put in there? Somewhere between add and full. Now, the plug itself, when it gets hard and pink, you need to replace it. Now, gaskets, scrape off the old gasket, always replace the gasket. Don't use silicone. We don't want any silicone in those bearings. It's like spaghettis. It doesn't roll real well through those rollers. Now, what we have here, this is a trailer setup, big bearing, small bearing. It's the most popular one out there. It does come with Stemco's Pro Torque nut. This Pro Torque nut has what we call the keeper. Some of the keepers have been redesigned in the last few years. We put teardrops or paddles on them. You can actually take them out with your bare hands. Now, on the steers, you're going to have to take a screwdriver and stick it in the slots. We have not redesigned the keepers on the steers. Now, on a conventional wheel end, gentlemen, you should be able to take this nut off with your bare hands. If you can't take this nut off with your bare hands, someone's over-tightened your wheel ends. On your double nut setup, this inner nut here should be able to be taken off with your bare hands. If you over-tighten bearings, they get hot and shear things off. Now what we have here, gentlemen, we happen to have what is known as the Guardian Seal. The Guardian Seal does have a deflector ring or wear ring on them, and you need to replace that before you go back with a Voyager seal. Now you can tell whether it's a Guardian. You'll have a deflector ring left up on that spindle, and the seal will be in that hub. Now, to take these deflector rings, do not use chisels, do not use torches. You could take a punch from the back side, or you could actually take a hammer like this and bend that ring down. When that ring starts moving at a 45-degree angle forward, take a ball peen hammer, then take the ring off. Take your ball peen hammer, hit it as close to one spot as possible. Don't hit the front side of that ring. You'll just push it back on. When that ring starts moving, take the flat spot of the hammer and drive the ring off. This way, gentlemen, that spindle will look brand new in 20 years. The reason you may have this type of seal on your equipment is you have a buggered up spindle. Now, the wheel seal itself, all you need is a heel bar, crow's foot to remove them. Discard the seal. Now we're in the inspection process. We got to inspect our bearings. Now, take your bearings over to the parts washer, clean them up in non-flammable solvent. And gentlemen, what you're looking for, if you got pitting on these rollers, you got pitting in that race. Replace them as they set. If you have staining on these rollers, that equipment's been sitting in water somewhere. If you have colors like purples and yellows, they don't come from the factory. It got so hot it actually baked that carbon steel right out of the bearings. If bearings are questionable, replace them. Now, you're also going to take that hub over the parts washer, and I get asked a lot, when do we change that solvent in the parts washer? When you start feeling grit, it's time to change it. Now, take the hub over that parts washer, clean it out. It's real critical, guys, that after you clean it out, you take a dry, clean lint towel, wipe it out completely, and do not clean anything with steam or water. We do not want anything to rust. Also, you want to take your hand, put your hand inside that race, and see if that race turns. If that race turns in the hub, you have a bad hub. Don't spike them and don't tack weld them in, replace the hub. That aluminum hub is cheap. That waste truck is cheap. If that wheel comes off, it gets very, very expensive. Now, if you got to replace the race or the cup, use a driver, a cup driver. This is an example of a cup driver right over here. This is adjustable based on the diameter of the hub, but this will drive them in. Now, to remove the race, we do recommend a mild steel drift, not brass. Brass will splinter, and it's not steel. We don't want to damage any of the components, but drive the races out. Now, don't forget to lubricate your bearings, your in and outer bearings, wrap them up in a towel, and put them aside till we're ready to reinstall them. Now, that spindle right there, our seals, which is the Voyager seals, which is what Waste Management uses, is a very, very wide seal. The lip itself is very wide. It takes up a lot of that spindle surface right here. You have to clean that spindle surface back. So solvent, scraper, and emery cloth or crocus cloth. This happens to be a 320 grade right here. This is the final process. This is the polishing process. Clean it back. And don't forget, the most important part of that spindle is the 6 o'clock position. Clean it all up. After you clean up that spindle shoulder, you're going to take your hand, you're going to go around that doggone spindle shoulder, and we're trying to feel for one thing, and that's burrs. If you feel a burr, ding them or nick it with a file or ball bean hammer, then go back over the emery cloth. This is where your inner and outer bearings are. You've got to clean this surface up. You do not want those bearings to hang up. Solvent, scraper, emery cloth. Polish it up. Now, threads, just common sense. If you don't clean up these threads, your bearing adjustment's going to be worthless. And when you reassemble that wheel end with a double nut or a single nut, all that contamination went where? Back into that hub. So again, solvent, wire brush, clean out your threads, and also your keyway. Now, we got all the components cleaned up, ready to reinstall. The Voyager seal is a hub install seal. The instructions are found on the back of the box. They're in English, Spanish, and French. And we also tell you what tool to use to install this seal. Do not use a competitor's tool. You will damage the seal in installation. What typically takes out wheel seals is 9 out of 10 times it is installation, okay? Another possibility could be contamination. It could also be excessive lateral movement on that spindle, okay? You've got to get your bearings adjustment down to 1 to 5 thousandths to maximize the life out of that seal in the bearings. So gentlemen, this is real critical to drive this seal in correctly. Lubricate your bearings, never install a dry bearing. And guys, put your bearing inside that hub before you drive the seal in. Not that any of you guys have forgot to do that. Take your lubricated bearing in there. Take your shop towel, wipe out that seal bore area. If you don't wipe out that seal bore area, you're going to have lubrication in there. This seal has to be driven in dry. Now, again, on the flap of that box, we tell you what driver to use. And on this driver right here, we have the tool number and we have the seal number. Our seals have a step on them. So that tool is only going to hit where? The step. So you can't crush this seal. If I took this plate and flipped it upside down and I hit the top of this seal, I would crush the seal. Again, seal is to be driven in dry. Now, get yourself a hammer. You don't need a 20-pound sledgehammer to drive these seals in. They only require approximately 400 pounds with a bore pressure to put them in. Now, if you mushroom these handles, warping these plates, you're using too much hammer. If these handles are warped or mushroom, the plates are warped, get a new tool. We do not want to have a bad installation. Now, the key to everything here is you got to drive the seal in straight. Some guys will tap the bottom of the plate, whatever works for you, and there's a definite sound with a hub installed seal. I could have stopped 2 hits earlier and it would have been installed correctly. Now, gentlemen, I know it's easy to lay that tool just like this on this shop floor right here, but the problem with that, if you got any contamination laying around on this floor right here, kitty litter and oil, and you laid it in that contamination and you drove that seal in, you just contaminated that wheel in. Get in the habit of laying them down flat. Now, always take your hand, put it inside that bearing. That bearing has to do what? Turn, all right? If that bearing doesn't turn, you got the wrong seal, wrong tool. Something's wrong. Take your thumbs and turn that seal. That seal's got to turn, okay? Now, this is where you lubricate the seal. You lubricate the ID of the seal, lubricate the spindle, and guys, do not bang that seal against the face of that spindle or drag it across those threads. You do that, that seal's coming back shortly. So what we're going to do is take that hub assembly, set it up on that spindle, have your outer bearing already lubricated. Do not let that hub drop backwards on you. If it drops backwards on you, from that weight of that hub, it will cock that seal. So don't let it drop backwards. Now, what we're going to do first is we're going to do the double nut. Double nut's been around since Ward Bond wagon train. It's pretty much becoming obsolete. Something you need to do is really inspect your double nuts. If you have any chisel marks on these corners around it off, replace them. Do not go back with them. The rule of thumb is the last person that worked on that wheel end is the first person they're going to come see if there's an accident. And you got to have some answers. Well, hey, I just put on the used double nut. Don't do that. There's too much liability today. So, gentlemen, what you're going to do here, take your inner nut, hand tighten the inner nut. Now, there are some shops out there that like to use impacts to tighten that inner nut. Don't do that. That socket can explode on you. So don't do that. What they want you to do is take a breakover bar with the appropriate socket. And by the way, if you replace the bearings, they do recommend torquing it to 120 to 140 foot-pounds while rotating the wheel. So what we're going to do here is we're going to draw that nut up snug while rotating the wheel. Now, you don't need a 4-foot-long cheater bar and jumping on this. All you're doing is what? Crushing everything. All we're trying to do with bearings is get them perpendicular, lateral, equal all the way around. If you do that, keep them lubricated, properly maintained, you can get 1,000,000 miles out of a set of bearings. Now, we always start our bearing adjustment in a relaxed state, so we're going to back it off. Now, the initial torque, and the torque that we use TMC's RP618. It is the only bearing adjustment procedure that will stand up in a court of law today. Your uncle might have showed you 30 years ago how to do your bearing adjustment. Your uncle is wrong. You've got to use the RP618. Now, the initial torque after you lubricate in our bearings is 200 foot-pounds while rotating the wheel. Tighten the inner nut against the bearings. The initial torque on a double nut system is 200 foot-pounds while rotating the wheel. Now, what they want you to do now is back it off 1 full turn. Now, this is where a lot of mechanics make a mistake. We all know this wheel is loose. We all know this will spin freely. If you spin it now, you just unseated your bearings. So don't spin it. So you're going to re-torque it to 50 foot-pounds, and 50 foot-pounds is not a lot. Before you start rotating and torquing, tighten your nut against the bearings. The final torque is 50 foot-pounds while rotating the hub. Okay, now this is a trailer application. On the RP618, it's going to tell you to back that nut off a quarter. Now, this particular setup right here has a dowel washer. This dowel washer's got to line up with that pin. If it doesn't line up, don't be moving anything. Flip it over. 9 out of 10 times it will line itself up, which it does. If it still doesn't line up, go to the closest hole loose. What you're trying to do, as of 1998, you got to get your bearing adjustment down to 1 to 5 thousandths, or that ABS light's going to go on. Now, this happens to be an aftermarket setup. Original equipment is going to have a little set screw. A lot of guys forget about that set screw. They take it out or they snap it off, they lay it on the ground. If you have the set screw, you need to put it back. Now, bendable stars, okay? Bendable stars, you got to bend a minimum of 2. I had one gentleman that said I did 5. Well, good for you, okay? A minimum of 2, and you got to bend them on the flats, not on the points. Now, your outer nut, based on this application, this is 2 5/8 spindle, is 300 foot-pounds. So you're going to torque the outer nut to 300 foot-pounds.